Good evening, everybody. I've got a few people hanging out in the chat. Welcome. Ben and I are both watching, so we should be able to check out comments and stuff a little quicker than I usually do. So I've got Ben Tomlinson with me here this evening, fellow Saska Busher YouTuber, Libertarian. I call him the Libertarian Professor. He has other names for himself, but I think all are relevant and relative. So I'm going to hand it over to Ben to chat a bit about himself and his channel and kind of what he does.
Yeah, I'm kind of the youngest person in this kind of group of individuals who kind of blew up in recent weeks of conservative political talking points, the Maxime Bernier stuff. Um, my channel just is usually just quick 5 to 10 minute videos discussing just whatever pertains to me. But as I am in school, sometimes I haven't been able to pump out as much content as I did over the summer as far as my political awakening. And I came to politics at an early age because in high school I was kind of an outcast, and I wanted to find something that kind of was my own, kind of find meaning to my life, and that was politics. And the Ron Paul campaign during 2012 was my big political awakening. He didn't end up winning the Republican nomination, but it was his movement that was fueled kind of the desire for someone of an outsider within the Republican Party in the U.S. And from there, I got involved with the Conservative Party of Canada and helped a MP get reelected in 2015. And then when Maxime Bernier ran for leadership, I supported him relatively day one. It was the first debate that I announced my support for him. I didn't do as much as I wanted to during the leadership race. And then I was surprised at how quickly he became really popular and came close to winning the leadership of the Conservative Party. And then after he decided to leave, I also decided to leave the Conservative Party, and now I'm with the People's Party of Canada and helping build it. And I attended my first EDA meeting last weekend, which was very, very interesting. And so basically, philosophically, what I like to identify myself as is a libertarian populist, where there is some little national identity undertones to it, but largely the broader philosophical belief of liberty, which is really summed up by three kind of pillars, is what I call them: self ownership, the non aggression principle, um, and spontaneous order.
Right on. Now, because we were going to talk about Max and we were going to talk about some of this stuff anyway, why don't, if you don't mind expanding on those three things, because that's something that a lot of people who don't, I guess, subscribe to libertarianism or maybe look into it might not understand, or if they haven't checked out your videos, I wouldn't mind a refresh as well.
Okay, well, self-ownership is the idea that you own yourself, and that is controversial in some circles because there are people who lack physical or cognitive abilities to actually take care of themselves. But the idea of self-ownership is you own yourself, therefore no one holds more value over your life than you do. And this is where you get into debates over positive rights and negative rights, because positive rights, in the sense that the government is awarding you an entitlement, you are having to infringe on another individual's either life, liberty, or property. Property in the sense of taxation or seizing assets, and then life and liberty by initiation of the use of force in order to ensure that those people actually do participate in those actions, forfeiting and surrendering what they have. And then that sort of ties into the non-aggression principle, which states that human behavior and human interaction should be largely voluntary, and that initiation of force or fraud, which is deemed as coercion, is not moral. It's very immoral. And so the non-aggression principle states that in human behavior, we should only initiate aggressive tactics in defense of oneself, and not to better one's own financial or otherwise power lot. And then the idea of spontaneous order is that from chaos, from a natural flow of basically entropy, you can have order rise through mutual interaction.
That was a pretty quick summation. I'm impressed, because I think that generally you would do each of those in like one video teaching segments kind of thing. So I sort of put you on the spot there, like, here's a test and go. So thank you. I appreciate you bringing that up. Now, the reason I wanted you to bring that up is partly in case some of the viewers aren't as familiar with your work, but also because if we're going to chat about Max Bernier, which we might as well dive into since you've brought it up a bit, and the People's Party of Canada, of course, that's a huge part of his platform, is not those exact words, right? But he does talk a lot about self-responsibility and freedom and liberty. And so that's something that, you know, there's a lot going on right now with the People's Party. There's a lot of conflict. I'm sure you've heard your share of comments being a Max or a PPC supporter, what with vote splitting and everything else. But I find what's really interesting is that the platform that he holds, it holds not only a lot of very practical economic, you know, taxation principles, immigration, etc., but just sort of focuses on that centralized theme. So for me, I feel like that's really important right now in the West. So you're in Saskatchewan as well, but you're in a very different part. What would you say the big issues are in your region? And I won't disclose that, but you can if you'd like. You can, I guess, as they pertain to this element of his platform, like, I guess overall, what do you think it is about this platform that would appeal to Saskatchewan? Because I certainly have my own thoughts on that, but I'd like to hear yours.
As far as Max's own platform, I think ag would be a large portion for southern Saskatchewan. There's a lot of farmers in the area I live in, which is Moose Jaw. Mostly retired farmers here. But other issues would be gun rights, since rural crime has been an issue, and a lot of farmers seek to own guns for self-protection, which is a legitimate reason to own a firearm. And another issue from Maxime Bernier's platform that would be essential for many people in Western Canada in general is equalization, because equalization, although a federal program, uses taxpayers' dollars from Western provinces and distributes it mostly eastward. And a lot of Western Canadians don't like that, because they themselves have economic issues that they believe their provincial governments could use some resources for.
I kind of call equalization, now that I am out of my more left-minded or left-leaning politics, I sort of call it like socialism between the provinces, essentially. Like, it does seem a little unfair in many respects. I understand Alberta's been pretty upset about that in the past. So I understand Quebec is very much, they're one of the provinces that would prefer to keep it. Is that correct? Is it the eastern provinces that prefer to keep it then?
Quebec, on a real dollar value, has received over half of all equalization payments.
So yes, so they stand to gain by keeping it then.
Yeah, it doesn't equate to as large a portion of the provincial budget as many of the maritime provinces, but it is a huge financial de-incentive, is what I call it, because usually when doing so, there is a lack of incentive to grow the economy, because you are receiving federal handouts to boost your social programs. So why need to invest in a Energy East pipeline when you just get the pipeline of cash from the feds?
Yes, the Energy East pipeline. That's one that I was so very liberal when all of that was going on. And of course, even at the beginning of the, I guess you could say, conflict and chaos that's going on in the West with their, well, God, now I guess it's just that we own that pipeline and it's just sort of sitting there. Nothing's really going on with it that's going to be beneficial, but that's a whole other story. But yeah, the Energy East pipeline, it seems like even if you're not pro-oil or you want to be an environmentalist, it really seems like that was something we could have really used. And then, of course, that gets into the idea of reducing reliance on like Saudi oil and everything else, right? Which sort of ties into some other stuff we're going to talk about. But so I was actually going to say, like, your words mirrored what I feel about in my area. So in my area, we have a ton of farmers as well, but there's also we have 43, I think, is the percentage. It's a bit tough to say because we actually do, and it's not a joke. It sounds kind of like a joke if I say it, but we have a lot of prison population. We have prisoners that sort of stay in the city after they go to prison. We have like 3 prisons here. We have a women's prison. We have a max security. We have a men's security. There's a youth center. So there's actually a lot of people that come and go either in the prison population or people that are moving here to be closer to those within it. So there's a lot of movement in and out, of course, a lot of reservations up north, but about 43% Aboriginal people here. So you have this kind of divide between First Nations rights and getting people out to vote and get interested in politics, as well as the rural issues which you mentioned, because rural crime up here has been really, really bad. And it seems like that is an issue that I find clashes often, because right now there's a lot of issues, as you know, in Saskatchewan with like the Justice for Stolen Children camp and the protest that went on about Colton Boushie and everything else. So I don't know. I know Max hasn't come out with the full First Nations platform yet. Have you heard anything more about that, like at your EDA meeting? Because I'm curious to hear what he has to say. I assume it'll be more of like a self-sovereignty kind of a thing, ideally having more power within each individual community, but I'm not sure what he's going to say about that.
Yeah, with regards to Mad Max's position on the Indigenous file, I think that from what I heard at my EDA meeting, he hasn't actually officially adopted a policy yet. He's weighing policy options, which usually all party leaders do. I don't know if he had enough interest in the file during the leadership campaign, and a lot of what he has out there right now comes from the leadership campaign. So what I think his position will be, I have no idea. I think the common position nowadays is to try and grant as much financial solutions to the First Nations organizations so that they don't make too much of a political stink. But overall, I don't know if there's actual legitimate policies being adopted on any major party, simply because they don't represent a large enough portion of the population to really affect outcomes. But with regards to that, I personally, which I'll separate myself from the party, which that pledge only says you only have to agree with him most of the time and not all of the time, so that's good. On the Indigenous file, I would say that tying the status and also various like land claims and whatnot to government decisions is really the wrong way to go. I'd allow them to maintain some form of status without actual government declarations or anything like that. But again, I don't have a large knowledge on the issue, and Indigenous population in southern Saskatchewan isn't as large as it is in northern Saskatchewan. So it's probably not as big of an issue to many municipal politicians in my area or provincial.
Yeah, I've lived in Moose Jaw and, of course, Regina and that whole surrounding area. I grew up in, small town 2 hours south of there. So, yeah, generally speaking, this is something that's very new, I find, to my demographic. I think also what's interesting about our riding up here is just the sheer size of it. I think ours is one of the larger ones. The one directly north, so the one north of, I think, La Ronge is, or the one that includes La Ronge is the largest one in Canada, or one of the largest. So it's hard to get people together. And I mean, even just aside from the policy issues, just getting people to a meeting when you have someone going between Melfort and PA, well, that's 2 hours apart, right? So like, is there 1 or 2 ridings in Moose Jaw?
One. It's part of Lanigan Lake Center, which covers kind of the area between Regina and Saskatoon, kind of in the middle of the province.
Okay, so you mentioned that you had your EDA meeting. Now, in case anyone's wondering, that's the Electoral District Association. So they've been having a lot of people have been asking, what's going on? We haven't heard anything in the media about the PPC. It's a one-man show. There's not going to be candidates. Blah blah blah. I mean, when you're actually involved in the party, we realize a little more that there are things going on in the background. It's the boring admin stuff that has to get set up before you dive in there and start doing campaigning. And so we have to wait for the registration process to be finished, and then we can kind of dig in a little bit. So that's kind of what's happening, in case anyone's wondering, because that does seem to be a big concern right now. So I right now am the president of the Electoral District Association in Prince Albert, which sounds far more important than it is, but it still is fun to say. What position did you end up taking on, Ben?
I am a member at large for Moose Jaw Lanigan Lake Center. Big shout out for this to Galatian, I don't know how to pronounce that last name, and Nigel Sharp, and Nigel Sharp, who are the two Saskatchewan coordinators for the People's Party, and we have EDAs in waiting in, I think, 11 out of 14 ridings. So we are pretty much almost all set with EDAs in Saskatchewan. And what EDAs are basically the ground force, the troops of the party within the ridings who coordinate events and adopt policy issues to take to national conventions, as well as basically welcome in candidates, recruit candidates, and having an EDA set up for when registration occurs is just one more tangible step towards having a full national campaign. A lot of parties can go without EDAs, but it doesn't really show that they are running a national campaign or are enough legitimate of enough threat to actually win an election. So that has been the main focus for the last 2 months or so, and it will be the focus until January, February, and that's when candidate recruitment will begin.
Awesome. I appreciate that. Yeah, it's I have to say that shout out to you. Yeah, I haven't met Nigel, but Ethan has been working closely with me up here because he's out of Saskatoon. Really good folks. I'm very impressed with the turnout at large. I don't know, have you read that CBC article that I think they recommend, or they talked about both Cody Payant, who's out of Saskatoon as well, and they talked about Ethan. I don't know if they mentioned Nigel, but very strong suggestions, as I'm not surprised with CBC. You could hear them both saying, well, we've been called white supremacists, but that's not what this is about. And you could definitely see that there was concern with the reporter and the quotes that they chose to highlight. Have you read that article? Or
Yeah, I did read it, and I saw the big bold quotes, but I think that's more just CBC tried to market it to their own audience. And I think they were being as objective as possible, at least within that interview. And one thing I have found with journalists and media organizations in general is that the ones on the ground, the local organizations, those are the ones that are willing to hear out anything. It's the national Toronto-based headquarters that are really within kind of one mindset, one groupthink ideology of the social justice progressive left. And aside from that, even CBC, local CBC affiliates are willing to hear out people with opposing points of view.
Yeah, I would agree with that as well. I find that, a lot of these smaller town outlets, so we have up here in Northern Saskatchewan, there's the Jim Pattison Broadcasting Group, and he has stations and businesses all over the province. I think he's one of the richest men in Saskatchewan for sure, if not in Canada. Very, very successful, very charitable, giving kind of a man. And so he has this massive broadcasting group. So it covers everything from North Battleford and PA. And then we have a separate newspaper as well. But I do find I was contacted by a lady at the newspaper, and she was kind of, flustered. Well, I didn't mean to get to you so late. We just saw the ad for this meeting. I want to cover this. Please keep in touch with me. And she actually, I felt, gave a very fair and accurate, kind of unbiased bipartisan, I guess you could say, account of it all. So I was impressed. It gave me a bit of faith, because I don't think journalism is dead. I think you're right. I think it's just the corporate national people that end up being sort of these beacons of like, yeah, SJW progressivism is the way to put it. So
yeah, I see that Rance Derrick is in the chat. So hi, Rance. And
I didn't even notice.
Yeah.
Oh,
and
good stuff.
We can pick up questions from the chat here and there if we are able to follow them.
Yes, I'll keep my eyes going left to right when I can. But yeah, if you guys have any questions, please do feel free to shout it out. I don't have too much more to say about the PPC at the moment, unless you do, Ben. We can move along to a topic that I kind of want to get into, because I'm kind of curious and interested in it now. You got me interested. Thoughts?
So with the PPC, it's important that as many people get involved as possible, even if you don't take on an official position within an EDA. Go out to the EDA meetings, help organize these events. It's going to be helpful in the long run to build this party from the ground up. And potentially, if we want to make a real stink in the 2019 election for these globalists, that we be involved and promote. And one thing that Nigel brought up at the EDA meeting, which is good, is that we need to start organizing events for the non-political. So we have to bring things like free pizza or other very entertainment or food-related activities to bring in people who may not believe the same things that we do, but are willing to go out for a family gathering or whatever.
Yeah, for sure. And I was asking, I think because I'm in an interesting position when you're on the board, so right now, because we're in this weird vortex where I can help bring people together. We can call together a pub night or something, or an info night, but you can't spend money, and there's things you can say, things you can't. So it's kind of an interesting place to be in. So I'm looking forward to having a little more ability to just kind of get out there and get some groups and just get talking. I think it's important. It's just going to be important to talk to people. People are concerned because they don't want any more Justin Trudeau. People are afraid. And I think it's that empathy of having the respect to say, okay, I know you're not ready to dive into this. I've been saying at the end of the day, you can check off whoever you'd like to on election day, but we have some time until then. Why not try to follow something awesome? And if it doesn't work out and the only way to get rid of Trudeau is to vote for Scheer, then you can still vote for Scheer. Nothing has changed, right? So that's what I've been kind of telling people. It seems to be a reasonably non-controversial way to put it, but who knows? Either way, I'm just proud to be part of the party. It's a good feeling. It's really good people. I encourage anyone, if you're on the fence, to check out the platform. If nothing else, I will throw this out because I haven't had a chance in my videos yet. There is a petition. I will put it up in the description. You can go check it out on your own. December 10th or 12th, I believe, Trudeau is going to be signing the UN Migration Compact. I'm not sure what this technical term is. Not necessarily something we want to be doing as conservatives. If you in any way follow the work that Ben and I do, or the other kind of Canadian YouTubers, something that we're a little bit concerned about when it comes to sovereignty and immigration. So something to look into. There is a petition that was started by the EDA out in somewhere in Ontario by one of our mutual viewers, and Maxime has sponsored it and taken it to the House. So if anyone's not aware of that and has not signed it, I'll throw a link in the description later. So beyond that, I'm going to move into something totally separate, which is the WWE, because we all know my affinity for talking about wrestling on my channel, right? And this one has been brought up by Ben, and it's an issue I've seen in the background but haven't checked into. And it's more or less about the controversy about the event in Saudi Arabia. So I'm going to let Ben explain more about what's going on, and then we're going to chat about it. And I'm going to check out the questions and get some screenshots of your guys's, or check out the chat and get screenshots of your questions. So take her away, Ben.
So in Saudi Arabia, well, for one, there was this assassination of a critic of the current king or the regime that was assassinated at a Turkey embassy, which has caused a lot of outrage. Many in the US more so kind of left, but there's been bipartisan criticism of it. And so earlier this year, World Wrestling Entertainment, the largest professional wrestling promotion in the world, signed a deal to hold 20 events over 10 years with the Saudi regime. It's their way of trying to become more progressive and bring in more American culture. And it was a pretty lucrative deal for the WWE. But in wake of this assassination of Jamal Khashoggi, who was a journalist, a lot of fans, both in the mainstream media and outside of it, have criticized WWE's decision to go forward with this event that they are holding tomorrow in Saudi Arabia. And two wrestlers ended up declining the event, or bowing out of the event, who were originally slated to perform. The first being John Cena, who is probably the biggest star in the WWE. He does movies and whatnot, and he's busy filming a movie in China with Jackie Chan, but he decided not to attend. And then Daniel Bryan, who's not as big, he's been on the Bella's reality show, but he's more in line with kind of the internet wrestling community, and he declined. He's more of a principled guy. He did a lot on the independent circuit in professional wrestling, and he knows it's a big risk to his career, but he decided not to go. And so the moral question about this is, do you continue to do business with someone for a large amount of money, even if they have done something that goes against your own principles and values as an organization or as an individual? And I probably, if I were in the WWE shoes, I wouldn't have done business with Saudi Arabia in the first place, even though that it did show that they were trying to change their culture and become not as masculine, not as authoritarian. And so, yes, I in spite of that, I believe that I wouldn't have done the deal for whatever amount of money that the Saudi regime was going to give them. They were saying about 20 to 40 million per event being held going to the WWE, which is quite a bit of money compared to other events that they hold.
Yes, the Saudis have some money. It does seem, they've been in the news a lot lately when it comes to these like international issues, whether it's politics or something more on a social level like this. Of course, thinking back to like Chrystia Freeland's tweet and everything else, Canada certainly has a lot of, like on government level, so many countries are involved with Saudi Arabia. And then when you look at it in more of a personal level, I guess, it's all just comes down to like the money, right? So I guess I read about that today, that John Cena had prior, like after this had happened, had backed out. But I think they said the event's still going, right? And Hulk Hogan is still going as well. Is that correct?
Yeah, Hulk Hogan's going to be there. He's probably not going to perform. He's way too old to do that. He'll probably have some role in kind of presenting one of these storylines that's going on as a tournament. So I'm guessing he'll be involved in presenting the winner with a trophy of that tournament, of a storyline that not a lot of fans have bought into.
Right on. So you're a WWE fan, I take it, yourself, or is it just something that you sort of find interesting on the sidelines?
Yeah, I've been a professional wrestling fan since I was 10, and basically I've been in a SMARC, which in wrestling terms is a smart mark, which a mark is someone who, like when you're perpetrating a fraud, the target of the fraud. So a smart mark in the wrestling sense is someone who knows it's all fake and knows some of the inner workings of professional wrestling. And so I've been a smart mark for 10 years, and I've still watched the product because I enjoy it as an form of entertainment.
Yeah, fair enough. I remember growing up when I was really young and you didn't understand that concept behind it. And it just had this very like theatrical kind of sense to it. I just remember oh God, what is his name now? The Undertaker. The epic epic entrance music to the end. I don't know why that's the thing that stands out in my mind, but I was saying to Ben earlier, I was a big Hulk Hogan fan. I had a huge crush on him when I was but a wee lass. So I digress. That has nothing to do with the topic at hand. So I noticed that, like, when I was doing my kind of research on all of this, the opinions seem a bit varied, but I haven't had nearly as much time to reflect on kind of what you said. A lot of politicians are weighing in on this. So, like, what has been the reaction so far? What are people's opinions? Are there some pretty strong, are people really against this, or are people caring a lot?
Lindsey Graham was one of the main ones who talked about it in the U.S., and so did Bob Menendez, who's running for Senate in the state of New Jersey. Part of the reason why it did become political was Donald Trump has had a working relationship with Vince McMahon since the 1980s, and kind of as a nod to having worked together in the past, Linda McMahon was named administrator for small business in the U.S. administration, and she had tried to run for the U.S. Senate a number of times in Connecticut, which is a deeply blue state, Republicans. But many of the backlash is coming from just they think it's unethical, and also they don't like that Linda McMahon is part of the U.S. administration, and still allowing this event to continue might reflect badly on the U.S. administration.
So it comes down to more about, they're more worried about how it'll look on them than they are per se about, like, what we claim to be worried about, which is, we always claim more of it on a virtuous, well, we're upset about human rights. We're willing to take your oil, but we're upset about the human rights, right? I assume it's kind of, a whole different ballgame. Lindsey Graham, that's interesting. He's someone that I wasn't familiar with prior to the whole Brett Kavanaugh situation. My understanding is he wasn't actually particularly respected. I'm saying that in a much nicer way than Steven Crowder said it, put it that way. But after watching him and his speech, my goodness, he's got some pretty strong opinions. I had a lot of respect for him after that speech, but I haven't heard his opinions on this one. So is he someone that you follow as well? Did you follow the Kavanaugh stuff as well?
Yeah, I followed the Kavanaugh stuff. I didn't do too much on it. Lindsey Graham, I follow a lot of U.S. politics, so I understand some of the key players, and Lindsey Graham kind of has always been more of the establishment, pro-war, pro-military, but also voted kind of with the Democrats on some other economic issues, and so he's not really seen by many of the kind of dire conservatives as a true conservative. But overall, I think that Lindsey Graham does make interesting points here and there, even if I disagree with him about 75% of the time. So he's very establishment Republican.
Right. That makes total sense. So yeah, I didn't mean to take that away from the conversation before, but it kind of just rolled into that. I don't know how much I have to say because I feel so uneducated on the WWE topic, minus my very small bits of watching it when I was growing up. I even didn't know that Hulk Hogan had been, that he had been taken down from like the Hall of Fame and everything because of comments with the N-word. I didn't know any of that. So like that all happened unbeknownst to me. I wasn't paying any attention, and everything was just falling apart in the wrestling world. I didn't even know it.
Well, it seems like our audience has dwindled a bit because of the wrestling stuff. So I think we can move on to another.
Sure.
Grab some
American politics it is, but we'll start with a couple questions. So the first one was from Scribbler's Squire, which I have to say slowly because it always just comes out really jumbled. He was asking just on the PPC stuff. He wants to get involved, but he's worried because he has some kind of controversial content on his videos. I think more or less about Faith Goldie stuff. I'll answer that quick and then I'll throw that over to Ben. My understanding is if you want to be a member of the EDA, so like president, secretary, vice president, or treasurer, then yes, you have to send in a criminal record check. You have to send in your YouTube or media accounts. They do want to make sure that they have someone that's more or less not going to burn the party down with terrible criminal activities, horrible racist slander. They just really want to make sure you're a decent stand-up person. So I've seen your stuff. I haven't seen it all, but I don't think I've seen anything that's terribly horrific or anything like that. But that's my understanding of it, that more or less they want people that are just aligned with the party values and aren't, radicals or anything kind of, what you would consider unreasonable. So I'll let Ben maybe touch on that too, if he has any thoughts.
Yeah, from what I heard, as long as you're not very slanderous on social media, even if you have relatively far points of view, you have to sign a pledge saying you agree with most of the platform, and that is purposely vague in order to allow for some forms of disagreement, as opposed to you have to sign a blood oath to the Constitution of the People's Party of Canada. So it's not that big of a pledge. You have to list your social media accounts, but that's only if you are adopting an elected position onto the EDA. And that is member at large, vice president, president, secretary, and financial rep. I can't remember what the specific term is. And you have to do a criminal record check, but it's more so just to make sure that your name stays out of the headlines. That's the purpose of it. And as long as your content is not like earth-shatteringly offensive that you wouldn't say if you were talking to your grandmother, then I think it should be fine.
I would agree with that summation. Yeah, I mean, depends on the grandmother, right? Some grandmothers are really rough and tough.
Yeah.
So one more question that'll kind of lead us into the U.S. topic, because we were going to chat a little bit about just the U.S. midterms. Pretty big deal coming up in, I guess, 5 days, which is a lot of tension down there. You can feel it on Twitter, although Twitter always feels tense. That's a whole other video topic. So someone asked about the Ben & Jerry's ice cream. I think it was Wayne asked about the Ben & Jerry's ice cream. Not sure if it was for us or everybody else, but that resist flavor that they brought out. Have you heard about that? Any thoughts on that, YouTuber Ben?
I haven't heard about that, so I can't really offer my opinion on the subject.
You'll have to Google it later. It's so Ben & Jerry's brought out a flavor of ice cream, and it's resist, and it's got the fancy cartoon picture on the front of it, and people are upset and boycotting Ben & Jerry's. So it's just, if you like Ben & Jerry's, apparently they're politically involved in their statements and messaging now, which is interesting. So yeah, just a small little side note, someone was mentioning it, but it does bring us into the talk about what's going on in the States, which you had asked about following the midterms. I don't have a lot of the important stuff. No, I haven't followed as far as polls and things like that. My understanding is it could be one goes to the Dems, one goes to the Republicans, but I'm just amazed at everything that's going on socially right now and how much is happening partisan wise. So between like those bombing or fake bomb threats, and of course this horrible shooting in the synagogue, which was just awful, and then everything else going on. We had the walkaway movements. There was that young Black Foundation, I can't remember the name of it, at the White House that same weekend. So you have all these positive things going on, and then we had all these really horrible things going on. So that's the stuff that I've been really paying attention to, blaming Trump for right-wing extremism, people blaming the Dems for extremism, all of that kind of stuff. So that's sort of what I'm weighing in on, but I'll let you take that one away too, Ben. I'm sure you have some thoughts.
Yeah. On the social aspect of it, there was a funny meme I posted on Facebook the other day, highlighting a quoted statement from Don Lemon, who first says, "We need to stop demonizing people," but then goes on to say, "The vast majority of terrorists are white men and right-wingers, and we need to do something about it." So, in a sense, he's demonizing at the same time he's telling people to stop demonizing, which is basically, essentially, the social civil discourse in the United States at the moment. So, there isn't really. I have also been following those issues, especially that terrible attack at the Jewish synagogue, which was just despicable. But there is one thing, as much as it pains me to say it, that a lot of Republicans, when they feel that there is going to be gun legislation in the works, they go out on force to vote. That is one particular issue where they always stand their ground. And I wish Canadians did the same to a certain extent as far as push back against potential gun laws, although we don't have a Second Amendment written into our Charter of Rights and Freedoms. So therefore, we do not have the real legal power to challenge any legislation that seeks to infringe upon our rights in that sense. As far as the midterms, I have kind of stopped following it after a while. I usually follow it during the primaries and then a couple weeks before. And it looks like the poll numbers have put the Republicans in just a spot where they can potentially hold on to the House of Representatives, but likely not. And then the Senate is likely to stay Republican simply because Democrats are defending 2-1. They don't do all the elections at the same time for the U.S. Senate. It's every 6 years for the terms. And as far as what I think could happen is obstruction to the nth degree if the Republicans don't hold on to the House. And I think that will actually help Donald Trump's re-election campaign, especially because for the 2020 presidential election at this moment, the leading Democrats are Joe Biden and Hillary Clinton. And Hillary Clinton, the person who lost to Donald Trump, and Joe Biden, the person who has been seen making relatively uncomfortable gestures to young women multiple times.
Such a diplomatic way of saying that.
Yeah.
You know, I when I was looking at the different people they want to have running for various positions in the Democratic Party, I know they're looking at like Michael Avenatti, and of course there's good old Elizabeth Warren, and then there's Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. You have these like kind of big names right now, and
you won't be 35.
Pardon?
You can't even run because you won't be 35.
I didn't even know that. You know, she looks like she's about 11, but I didn't know how old she actually was.
Yeah, she's 28.
Okay, well, interesting. It's just so interesting. I find that they have so many names in various positions right now that are just, she's not as bad, I guess, in the sense that, I mean, regardless of the fact that I don't particularly respect what she's saying, but as far as like the cartoon nature of it all, right? You know, we all thought Donald Trump was so ridiculous, or at least I did because I was on the lefty side. Now I've come around to him. I really have a lot more respect for him than I used to, not in every capacity, but in some, I suppose I could say that I wish there was more Trumpian balance up here and maybe a little more Canadian balance down there or something like that. But you know, the Avenatti thing, that I find amazing, all of it, the horse face stuff and the comments about his member being like Mario, just all of it. It's just like sometimes it's like watching an absolute I don't know, like a reality TV show or something like that.
Well, they say politics is just acting for ugly people, so there is a lot of theatrics to running in politics and being a politician. And Donald Trump is the antithesis to a politician, which is important in our modern society because we need someone like that. We need an ego-driven maniac to thwart the dishonesty, the I'd say power grabs of modern liberalism, which isn't really liberal. And in order to do so, you need to have someone who's a bit of a power-hungry fiend himself, but for separate purposes. George Washington during the American Revolution was sort of like that. He was very power-hungry and very dictatorial, but he was doing so for the sake of individual independence. So once it reaches a certain point when the discourse and civility devolves to a large, dangerous moment, you do need someone who has the balls to challenge. And I don't think I would be nearly as egoist as Donald Trump is. And therefore I don't think I do as an effective job in a leadership role.
Yeah, I can't say that I have very I'd like to get into politics to some extent. I still don't know where that's heading. I very well might just write songs about it and talk about it instead. But as far as the whole leading a country kind of thing, yeah, you need a ballsy bugger in there. That's kind of where I'm at too. I'm not against women leading stuff like that, but there is something about his personality, and I think it's funny too. I don't know how I feel about the Q stuff. I'm doing some research. I just kind of heard about it recently. I know there's a lot of conspiracy stuff, and you can take it to the nth degree, as with any rabbit hole. But I do find it kind of interesting that I think he knows more about what he's doing when he puts out these crazy tweets. People say that he's so polarizing, or that he's this buffoon, and everyone's just so surprised every time he says something. Sometimes I wonder if he hasn't just paid like a 15-year-old kid and given him a pizza and been like, can you just take care of my Twitter account? I'm actually back here dealing with a whole bunch of issues, like I'm going to put a bunch of people in prison. So I'm always curious if he's just actually smarter than he comes off as, right? And that he just knows that the media will latch. He throws him a bone, right? Oh, call her a horse face. That'll take him for 4 days. I can't help but wonder, like, do you think he's increased the rhetoric and the hate? I keep hearing this back and forth from both sides. Like, what are your thoughts on his the populist side of it? I mean, they say he's influencing everything from now the Brazilian election. They're calling that guy, the Brazilian Trump. Like, what are your thoughts on, is it just all far right rhetoric kind of stuff, or do you think there's an actual concern for his the way he deals with things?
Trump won because he knew how to use the media to win. And he did so by, for one, making outlandish statements that will carry him through a 24-hour cycle. And he sucked out all the oxygen within the Republican nomination. And then when debating Hillary Clinton, he toned down a little bit, scaled down a little bit, but he still used the media to his advantage. And a large portion of Americans distrust the mainstream media. And he used that and played the media off of himself. And in doing so, he energized a whole base of people who had never voted in years before. And so Maxime Bernier has to take a similar tactic if he does want to reach a large presence, but then he also risks being as divisive as what the mainstream media call Trump. And I think mainly he makes all of this Twitter stuff. He keeps journalists focused on the Twitter, focused on his outlandish statements, as he actually reforms many government bureaucracies that have become so entrenched in decades past that Ronald Reagan truly was right when you say the closest thing to eternal life on earth is a government bureau.
Yeah, that's one of those times where the old sayings are so true and they just ring true, right? Like you could call it a cliche saying, but that one's not really so much. I'm just watching some of the comments here. I'm wondering here, I see a lot of talking still about the PPC and stuff in Canada. So I might dive back here just because, you got to give the people what they want, right? First, I'll say to Linda, she said, be careful of that rabbit hole. Don't worry, I'll be careful. I'm very cautious with all conspiracy theorists and stuff like that. So I promise I'll be cautious, dear Linda. Thanks for watching out. Space Cat, I did get your question. So that's the one I'm going to ask because I think this is a pretty important one. So Ben, we're going to talk about healthcare a bit because she was asking about a friend of hers who is, I believe, in the medical system and is concerned about Max's policy on healthcare, worried about, I think the question mentioned private training or private school, but I'm not sure if it meant also private clinics. Now, my understanding is he's looking at more of a two-tier system, like a semi-privatized system in Canada. I personally think it's very advantageous for my own reasons, but I'll let you talk about that a bit if you would like.
Yeah, on healthcare, I think the official policy is to remove transfers from the federal government, and potentially it will help lower taxes because it is a federal spending, but it is usually tied to the provincial taxes that arise from what would go to provincial healthcare in the first place because it's the provinces that run it. And so he doesn't really have an official position on whether he wants two-tier or not. But he he does want to leave it to the provinces, which is written into the Canadian Constitution, that it is the provincial responsibility to take care of healthcare. And with regards to the file, with regards to the issue, I am for a two-tier system. I'm even further than that, but I won't jeopardize PPC's electoral chances by saying let's abolish the most protected, most popular government program in all of Canada, the health system. And so I'll just keep my mouth shut when it comes to that. But yeah, he's for removing the federal transfers to healthcare and then allowing the provinces to adopt whatever system they find most effective, and including exploring two-tier options.
Yeah, that's kind of what I had heard him say too. So I feel personally that is advantageous in a couple of respects. First, in the sense of, like, I would say three main areas. One would be just plain old administration and efficiency. Health Canada has some issues. And then when it comes to the relationship between Health Canada and the individual provinces, there's even more issues and inefficiencies. And then when it comes to the individual districts within each province, there's more. So you have these levels that have to be dealt with all the way down. And by the end of it, just admin cost, insane, right? So I can't see, but that's the Libertarian coming out and me wanting less government, national control. But I don't see much good coming from a lot of Ottawa involvement in much of anything in Saskatchewan. Personally, I don't think that I'm alone on that one. I think a lot of people in Saskatchewan and Alberta would agree with that sentiment on a lot more than healthcare. But like you said, this is one of our most held on to ideals, and it's not even because people necessarily have thought it out whether it's a good thing or not. I've asked you a lot of questions about free market healthcare versus socialized, and we've talked about, or you spoke of the US not being the greatest example of it. And that's a very good point, right? But people assume, well, it's better than the States because of this, and so therefore, we're lucky and it's free. And people have all of these sort of misconceptions. The first one, of course, being that it's free. So you have this like inefficiency that goes on. So I think that would be helpful. The second would be just on the money side of it. I do think it would save taxpayer dollars. And if you do have options for people to pay for a private MRI or a private CT scan or a surgery, we have that option to some extent. Like False Creek out in Vancouver has a clinic for some specialists, some procedures. I think Medicine Hat and Calgary have something. I think Regina just got maybe an MRI clinic. So there's some options. But ultimately, when that person pays for that service, they get taken off of the list. And that person now is taken care of by their own money, and the poorer person or person that's less fortunate can sneak into that spot that opens up. So to me, it's a win-win. I've been the person waiting for that call for a cancellation, and I know how precious that can be. And I don't care how it opens up, if someone pays for it or not. But I don't know, like ethically wise, what are your thoughts on all of that? I think healthcare is good. I'm glad we have it, but I don't think we'll ever get rid of it. But I'm starting to think that maybe we've been lied to a little bit about the fact that it's the best possible way to do things.
Yeah. For the two-tier system, I think that the best outcome, it would be reducing these wait times. Canada has the longest wait times in the industrialized world by a long shot. And part of it is due to a large portion of our system is completely public. Now, there are other countries with higher degrees of public funding than Canada, but there is also private options in many of those countries. And there was a Supreme Court ruling in years back that said that denying access to private system is basically it's a violation of human rights, simply because people can't wait so long. So if someone has the money and wants to receive the service, they should be allowed to do so, which has moved some provinces more open to the two-tier system. The constant complaint with regards to that is they fear that the quality of service would decline within the public system, because those who go to the private system would make more money and then would be higher quality, more educated, etc. And so those who are within the public system won't receive the same access of care. I don't really buy into that, simply because cutting down the wait times would be an improvement to the quality. So saying that the public system as it is with the longest wait times would decline in quality by reducing those wait times is just hard to buy into, illogical in my opinion.
Yeah, fair enough. Quality of life, if you think about it, like when you talk about wait times, just to say wait times is just two words that don't mean a lot, but what wait times mean is the degeneration of whatever condition that is. So for example, my father had a surgery recently back in August, and he had been waiting and waiting and waiting for a diagnosis. He got to the specialist, they weren't comfortable. He had to go back, be his own advocate, get re-diagnosed to someone that would actually look at it, waited another, however many months, calling to kind of beg, be your own advocate. You get bumped up a little, then you wait for the test, then you wait for the surgeries. And by the end of it, because of the process that he went through, he came very close to losing circulation in his leg. And at some point, a few months down the road, could have lost his leg. So these are the types of things that I've heard stories like this that are a lot worse than that have actually resulted in the death of a family member. I believe AJ has a sad story that he's mentioned on his channel once about healthcare and misdiagnosis and wait times. I know for me, it was very much an issue of the wait time severely decreased my function and has made my recovery that much longer. And there's things that are damaged that can't go back, right? So when you talk about the quality of life and actual human rights, yeah, wait times are a human right in that sense. If you're going to give healthcare that's supposedly, universal and free, is it really worth doing it if it's going to actually result in less effective care? That seems to make, no sense.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. I'm going to respond to a comment that I've seen by Scott McLean, who seems to be into this healthcare issue, talking about Joe's trip to the hospital recently, and he's talking about $10,000 medical expenses if you were in the U.S. The reason why it is so inflated in the U.S. is because it's tied to insurance. And by doing so, by simply using your insurance premium as a leverage to go to the doctor for a standard checkup, you are inflating the cost to that service because it is increasing the demand. And so tying insurance to standard care, like checkups, very maintenance work as far as your own personal health, will inflate the cost of healthcare in the long run because you are increasing the demand of it. Therefore, its value increases within the economy. And so moving away from an insurance-focused system and believing that insurance is not the solely way to handle healthcare will be an important step for the U.S. to take. It'll probably never happen because a lot of the insurance companies and also hospitals benefit from that marriage.
Right, that makes sense. Yeah. I think about it in this way too. Now, this is more of a personal, sort of a theoretical, because there's no way for me to know in my situation or in a friend or a neighbor or a family member situation whether one system was working better than another. I have friends in the States that say they're very happy with their system, but that's generally because they have good insurance. So I've also heard from people that say if you don't have good insurance, you can get left. Well, of course there is Medicaid, which is, I don't know, those people that argue that, I've asked, okay, well, what are the limits for Medicaid? What is the maximum amount you can make a year of income to have those services covered? For example, in Canada, if you're on some kind of a disability benefit provincially, generally you get things like dental cover. Generally, you get things like prescriptions to a certain extent because you're under basically the income tax limit, which is say $12,000 a year. So that's, considered poverty. So in the States, they do have Medicaid. What is Medicaid like? How are their services? These are answers that I haven't had many responses to from individuals. I've done some research on it, but without being in the system and each state being different, it's a bit tough to say. So when you look at it though, from a larger, I guess, perspective, like people would say like a 40,000 foot view or whatever, for myself, I've made more than 5 calls to the States about inquiring on paying for either specialist referrals or specialist appointments various types of diagnostics and even a surgery. So this last year I was waiting for about 10 months and it was getting so bad and nobody was taking it seriously that I called a clinic in California that could have got me in within 3 weeks, but it would have cost me $36,000. I was as ready as you can imagine to sign away my life on a loan, and I wouldn't have cared. Now, the irony of it is that if I was in the States, would I have had to pay that? Possibly. Would I have had to pay for all my surgeries? Maybe. But if I had had insurance, maybe it wouldn't be as bad as we think. Plus, if I'd have been able to get my surgery and not have these wait times and not have degeneration of the disease, I might have been back to work a year faster. A year faster is another, $12,000 to $20,000, depending on how much I could work. So when you look at all of these things in a larger spectrum, it's really hard to say Canada is better than the States is better than Canada. Each have huge negative factors and each need major amounts of work. In my opinion, a little more balance would be required. Now, Ben can probably clean that up with a nice 3-second economical explanation or something a little more intellectual than I can. So I'll let him do a summary because he's good at that.
Well, what I would say is that the U.S. system is definitely not a free market system, and it is a very corporatist system, and therefore it is not really the best solution for Canada. But Canada's healthcare system is definitely not a solution for the United States, simply because they have 10 times our population. And so therefore there is increased risk to bureaucratic administrative costs that will be so damaging to the US economy that it may never recover. There is an estimated cost to Bernie Sanders' healthcare system, and they are talking tens of billions of dollars a year, which the US, or tens of trillions of dollars a year. I think it's like 40 trillion. It was a while back that I looked up this research from someone who was actually going to pro-Democrat sources, and it was $40 billion over like a 5-10 year period, which would have doubled the US budget every single year, just this system. And so it would cause major economic disaster in the US if they adopted the Canadian system. I think that there is no perfect solution to the healthcare issue. On a principled note, I disagree with it because it assumes that the government can use force against you to make you pay for a service that they are providing for. And that applies to anything, pretty much anything related to the government, except maybe personal protection. But even then, you could say that they're running a mafia racket. So I don't really have the greatest solutions policy-wise, and therefore I don't plan to run to be a politician anytime within the next decade. But I do think that I have a role to play in just offering deep philosophical meaning to various issues so that people are more informed about alternate opinions.
Yeah, for sure. I'm going to just read you one quick question. I don't know if you kind of feel like you've answered it, but just to finish it up with Scott, he asked, Ben, so how could you pull the system towards paying insurance to the levels that insurance could allow us to pay those random greater than $10,000 bills? He finishes by saying, Stefan Molyneux makes extremely good points on how the insurance system can work and how it would work in terms of the health system if privatized. But right now, I don't think it's tenable. Any final thoughts on that?
Yeah. As long as the people who use insurance don't use it for varying costs that would just artificially inflate the value of healthcare, it can work. But the problem is, over time, there will be people who do that. And there will be people who use insurance as basically the easiest way to make it imprinted in people's minds is, do you get gas payments when you pay for your insurance? No, you don't. You don't get your gas covered when you pay for your insurance. So why should you expect your masseuse to be on your insurance coverage, your day-to-day checkups to be on your insurance coverage. But the problem is that it starts at the individual level. It starts at making responsible choices, and there is a large discrepancy in individual responsibility in society today. And part of me believes that this was orchestrated. Part of me believes that it's just degeneration.
Yeah, time will tell, I guess, on that one, right? It's a tough one. Some days it feels like it's all a little bit unraveling. Other days I have more hope and faith. Perhaps it depends on the people I chat with in my YouTube comments that day. Just kidding. They're not that indicative of my day. I've asked out if there's any other questions that anybody has. Is anyone here a second channel called Anarchor? Oh yeah, Anarchor is the one that's been hanging out in causing a ruckus. He's good though. He's just likes to stir up shit. I don't even know if he actually disagrees with what he says. I think he's just a devil's advocate. So I don't. Go ahead.
Yeah, he's very intellectual, and I haven't watched many of his videos, but I do like the perspective he offers, and I may not agree with him all the time, but he at least treats everyone cordially when he's in the room.
He does. I appreciate that as well. And it's funny because I used to be on a social media platform I called it Discus, but I think it's Discuss. It's QUS is how they spell it. And it was when I got into it because our local PA Now newspaper group, that's the little commentary section locally. So when I was following local news last year, I would sign up and go on to Discuss. And then I got kind of hooked on it for a few months when I was laid up, because what else are you going to do? So I'd have these really deep, awesome, meaningful political conversations, or I would just check out, people watch on the sidelines on a lot of Ontario politics boards. And I'm positive it was Anarchor. He hasn't denied it yet, so I'm pretty sure that was him. But I remember watching him and the others duke it out. So yeah, I appreciate people like that. We need them. We need them to keep us on our toes.
Yeah, I enjoy that too. And yeah, I think we can put this evening that covered a lot of topics into a nice little bow and call it a night soon.
Sure, that works for me. I don't see any other questions. I think everyone's just kind of wrapping up their own chat. So yeah, we've been wanting to do this live stream for a while, guys. Ben and I made a little friendly competition that whoever got to 1,000 subs first, we'd have a little live stream chat on their channel. So that's how this all came to be. Although it's nice. I haven't chatted with Ben on a live stream for a while since, I don't even know, probably since one with Irving Twin, and then one before that with Joe. So
yeah.
We did have no bandwidth issues at all, which I'm very grateful for. We were just saying, SaskTel has pretty good internet. Can't complain too much about that. If you guys don't live in Saskatchewan, you don't maybe know what that is. It's our Crown Corporation. We do have other options for internet, but it's our big provider of internet and phone and whatnot. Yeah, so any final words, Ben? Anything you want to shout out, promote your channel, throw any positive messages, sing a song, whatever you got to do?
I haven't been doing too much. I've tried to set myself a minimum 3-day grace period simply because I've been so busy with my coursework. I'm a student at Saskatchewan Polytechnic, and so basically I'm on YouTube. I also sometimes link my Facebook and BitChute, but I've been very inactive on there as well. I've been more active on YouTube than anything else. And so I'll just give my send-off, which I do at all my videos, and it applies to the personal level and not the national level. Liberty, it knows no borders.
Right on. Always good to have a little send-off. So I will leave you guys as well. Thank you. If you guys don't mind leaving a like on your way out, it's always helpful for the good old whatever Google does, I guess, with analytics and sending this video out into the ethos. So thank you very much for tuning in. And as always, be good to each other, but not because the government tells you to. Have a good night, everyone. Take care.